Welcome to CIHT Podcasts.
Welcome to the second part of this podcast series looking at cities. This one is called The Century of Cities, but might have better been called The Century of Sustainable Cities, or even The Century of 15-Minute Cities, as it continues a conversation that I had with Professor Carlos Moreno from the Sorbonne in Paris, where he is Scientific Director of Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Professor Moreno is also Special Envoy to the Mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, where he was the driving force behind the concept of the 15-minute city. The idea has spread far beyond Paris and is now being embraced by cities across the globe. Thank you for listening.
Turning to another area of the world, America, I think there's interesting things to focus on there. We've got the west coast of America where you have the San area running from San Francisco to San Diego, comprising 68 million people. And on the east coast, you have Boston to Washington. And I think there's an interesting aspect to draw out there is that the power of mayors when they're effective versus the nation state, and obviously there's a political underpinning to this idea, is that they can mayors be more effective at addressing global challenges than the nation state, particularly when you look at the effects of democracy when it's vested well within city mayors.
San or Boswash, different hyper-metropole, because we have the same situation today, for example, in China, in the region of Shanghai, in the north of China with Beijing urban. Of course, we have this new phenomenon, the name of hypermetropolization or hyper-regionalization, in fact. Yes, you're right, because we could observe, in particular in Sansan, in Boswash, the importance factor today in the 21st century of cities, of metropolises. This is the sentences of the former mayor of Denver, the former president of the American Association of Mayors, Mr. Wellington Webb. He said the 19th century was the century of empire. The 20th century was the century of state nations. The 21st century is the century of cities. Today, we could say the century of metropolises. We need, I think that I wrote that the COVID-19 crisis show us the power of cities around the world, because when for avoiding the viral propagation of the COVID-19, it was necessary to reduce the activity in cities. The totality of state nations are totally dropped in the economical activities, in the GDP, etc., etc. Today, of course, the century of cities, the 21st century, is the century of the power of the local governance. You could observe in America, of course, with the Trump, with the federal state, as a respect of San Francisco, New York, or Boston. But I think that's the same thing in UK, because you have a particular situation with the UK when UK have decided to leave the European Union. And London, for example, this is a big capital, this is a global city. It's not necessarily a real agreement for leaving from European Union. But anyway, this is another point. But you're right, today the global cities are today territory with their own vitality, their own dynamic. And today is very important to consider the power of cities, and the C40 cities, for example. This is a real proof that the importance of the network of cities around the world. In the case of the C40 cities, this is the network for fighting climate change. But at the same time, you said a minute ago, the C40 cities was adopted my concept of the 15-minute city for implementing it in the different cities, global cities, big metropolises, among the network of C40 cities in India, in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe, etc., etc. I think that today we need to promote the development of the network of cities, and this is a way to have a kind of pressures as a respect of state nations. I think today to develop the power of cities, I think that today we need to transform the relationship between cities and state nations. And at the same time, the cities with the 15-minute city, this is the new way for regenerating cities. I think that the enemy for big cities is to lost their vitality, to lost their dynamism. I think that with the 15-minute cities, we have the possibility to reinventing the new dynamic of cities, social, economical, and ecological. I think that the 15-minute city, this is the real way for building in the 21st century, in the new decade, this concept of the sustainable city, because the sustainable city is not only an ecological city. The real sustainable city, this is a city with the convergence with the ecological attitude and the new economical attitude based on the shared value, and the social attitude based on the social inclusion. And when my friend, the Nobel Prize, Mohamed Yunus, wrote a very, very impressive book, 000, he said, zero carbon, zero poverty, zero exclusions. I said to my friend, Mohamed Yunus, we needed to transform in a positive attitude, not only zero carbon, zero poverty, zero exclusion. I need to create a new added value by a new ecological attitude based on low carbon activities for fighting climate change, to develop the new economical added value by the new relocalization of the economical activities in the districts in order to improve employment and to break the dependence of the China of the far places, and at the same time promote the new social added value, in particular for developing social inclusion, because we need to fight racism, populism, and demagogic attitudes. The 15-minute city, in reality, this is the concrete way based on this new sustainability, the convergence with the economical, ecological, and social new attitude. This is the possibility to have a viable city, bearable city, and livable city. I think that this is if we wanted to put it in a nutshell, the concept of 15-minute city, this is the new way for this sustainable attitude in order to change the way for building cities in the next decade.
80% of carbon emissions come from cities, 75% of energy consumption, and 85% of the wealth is generated in cities. So they're obviously, and I think the location and the history of cities means that they're potentially more vulnerable, and they recognize that, given they're often located near to water for access, obviously for trade. One of the things that's interesting is cities are, I think, the history of cities is the history of inequalities. And if you look at Paris, Professor Sir Peter Hall, who was Professor of Planning and Regeneration at the Bartlett School of Planning, gave an indication of the legacy of urban planning decisions, that they cast a long shadow. So if you look at Paris now, part of the legacy of Haussmann was that a lot of the poor people, a lot of the industries were pushed out beyond the ancient city walls. And now you have a ring of people living in 60s and 70s blocks at the edge of the city with hardly any services. So there is that real element of legacies of urban planning decisions that not just Haussmann, but obviously planners that came after him have embedded within a city fabric that actually is not really that desirable. And in those areas, how would you then draw them into a kind of sense of a living city that does have those services, does have that vitality?
We need today to transform the social fabric in cities. In fact, this is the case in Paris. We live in a global city as Paris with the several problems, in particular for housing people. This is a reality. Because we have the strong inequities in cities, in particular for affordable housing. We live in a city with a very high density. This is one of the most important density in the world. And at the same time, the square meter, this is very, very, very expensive. This is the case in London, of course. And I think that your question is very interesting, because we need to fight about a very important danger in Paris, in San Francisco, New York, in Boston, in London, Madrid, in Milan, Frankfurt, the phenomenon of gentrification. Because, in fact, when we consider the housing for people, the poverty or the unemployment or the social exclusions, in fact, are managing this new way based on this gentrification, because this is the possibility for excluding people for living in cities, because the square meters is very, very expensive. This is not possible to buy the flats in Paris without higher revenues. And of course, this is very difficult for people to rent, including for young people. We have been assisting to this phenomenon of ghettoization for the poor people in the different districts. And on the opposite, we have this separation. This is, I think, totally linked with the phenomenon of segmentation, because if you consider the west of Paris, for example, this is the opposite. The very, very big flat, the high revenues, the very important social separation. When we promote the concept of the 15-minute city, in particular in Paris, with the mayor of Paris, Anne Hidalgo, we wanted to act for breaking this social segmentation, in particular for housing. I think that this is very important if we want to wanted to have a successful in this new period for 6 years. We need to propose the new ways. In particular, the question is, of course, to continue to promote, to amplify, to increase the social housing. I think that is a very important tool to propose the social housing, but the danger of the social housing is the ghettoization. We need to break this situation because we need to mix different social, professional categories if we want to develop this mingling people to have different. It's not easy because the law for housing in France, Paris, it's compulsory to propose at least 20% of social housing in each one of districts, but it's not totally reached this percent, including several mayors, local mayors. When they disagree with this way, they prefer to pay the penalties for avoiding the social mix. I think that we need today to develop in the 50-minute city the new creativity. And this is the case in the city of Paris, for example. Miss Anne Hidalgo voted in the first Paris Council 3 years ago on Thursday. The new tools based on the subsidiary of the city of Paris in charge for buying the square meters, building infrastructures, and this is in this case the city will be the new owner in order to propose, for example, to propose people to buy these square meters, but only the wall and not the ground. This is the important separation between the ground and the building in order to divide by 2 the price for the square meter. But I think that we need to develop in the next 2 years new tools. We have been assisting today to the dramatic situation with the flat proposed by Airbnb. With the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, this lot of flats are empty today because we want the will for capture this flat totally empty in order to introduce again these square meters in the real estate of Paris. This is the same situation, for example, for the little markets, for the shops, because if we wanted to develop in the proximity, for example, libraries, on the artisan of the different, we need 2 square meters for not necessarily profitable activities. The city of Paris have decided to create several years ago a subsidiary, Semaest, in charge to buy the square meters for developing the real estate for commercial activities. And this is a very, very important success in the city of Paris, because in the different districts, including with the high revenues, with the lost revenue, we have today the shops of the different services with the owner is the city of Paris, and the city of Paris rent these square meters for different activities with the very correct price. This is not in the competition for the real estate speculation. And I think that we need today to reinvent the new tools for promoting the new affordable surfaces for private activities and not only for public activities. And this is the very interesting way for exploring with different cities around the world if we wanted to develop this concept of 15-minute city. And at the same time, we have the possibility to discuss with the private sector for developing together this new way, because we have the possibility to have the New Deal. For example, we have at the center of Paris, at the heart of Paris, in the historical district, the old big market, big shops. And today we have been developing a radical transformation for changing the destination. This is not only the big shop, this is now a new hotel, but with the regulation of the city, with the intervention of the mayor of Paris, we have the possibility to transform the surfaces in a hotel, but to preserve different surfaces for the social housing. And this is the private operation, but the public power, the local power, the mayor of Paris has the possibility to develop in the public, in private actions, the regulation for offering the public service, in particular social housing, one-point shop, sport centers, and the activities for social inclusion. This is very, very important because I think that the possibility for transforming our cities is not only by public sources. We need today to mix with the public initiative, with the private initiative, and we need to develop the New Deal for transforming cities, in particular with the 15-minute city. This is a very, very, very good way for developing a peaceful deal for transforming cities.
So alongside the creation of protected spaces for walking and cycling, it's a reimagining of how we organise our buildings and our housing and our wider services. Well, thank you very much. That was an interview with Professor Carlos Moreno. Thank you very much. Thank you.